because that's bad. And I like the cell phones on, so if you want to leave the ringers on, that's cool. That gives it a different vibe than we normally get. So don't silence anything. So I'm gonna be the opposite of Daniel today, and just say go ahead and leave them on. That's good. All right, just set some of these. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 304 of This Is Whole Life. It is a special edition. It happens once a year, but it hasn't happened for the last 2 years due to something that should I say it? No?
Yes. I want to know what you're going to say. Yeah.
Well, we found
He would want it said because he is
true.
the whole reason this happened.
He is the whole reason it happened. So if you missed church retreat for the last 2 years, our special guest today is Dr. Peter Enns. And he admitted last night to the whole group, I don't know if it was recorded, but he did claim responsibility for COVID.
Yeah.
And the good news is God answers prayers.
It's true.
So if you can just keep that in mind as you go about not blaming him, that would be great. And a little forgiveness in your heart would also be a welcome thing for that. But seriously, we don't get a chance to do this very often, and we don't always get a chance to have our guest speakers when they come to the church. We have scheduling, and they have flights to catch. They have other things to do. And so we don't always get a chance to maybe ask the questions that we would like to do, or the answers, if there are some, or if it's if there isn't. But we don't get a chance to maybe go a little bit deeper like we do each week on the podcast. And so this is a treat for us. And I've already really enjoyed the time that we've gotten to spend listening to Peter. And it seems that what you've talked about is probably the thing that I would say every Christian struggles with on a regular basis. And yet what you're saying is that if we spend a little more time on the hands-on things that are obvious about what Jesus gave us to do, love each other, take care of each other, and do the things that aren't impossible or things that we can actually understand, not that it makes it easy, but that we would maybe have a little bit easier time when we have these questions, or when we get into topics that we either just can't understand, or maybe when God is in the quiet and we don't hear him. And why doesn't it make it easier though? when you still want those questions answered, or you still want that why, or that how come, or I don't feel you. Why doesn't it make it easier, even if we buy in totally to what you said today and last night? Why doesn't it make it easier for us? What is it about us that causes it to still feel like we're missing out on something?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good couple of questions sort of folded in there. And I think it's because we're so used to, we've been taught that what it means to have faith means some sense of unquestioned presence of God on a fairly regular basis, right? If you just have your devotions in the morning, the Spirit magically shows up and gives you all the right answers, and you go off with your day and everything's fine, which is a very, I'm going to say, a privileged point of view, because there are people in the world who don't have that luxury at all. Right, so how do they commune with God when they don't have their morning devotions, because they don't have Bibles and they don't have coffee mugs? How do you do the coffee? I don't know how they do it, but so I think that's part of it, because I think we're all in the West largely. This is a blanket statement, but I'll stand by it. I think we're largely programmed for a certain kind of way of communing with God, which tends to be very intellectualized, even if the arguments aren't good ones. It's still an intellectualized kind of faith, right? And that's one reason. And I think we're not really programmed to be more whole-bodied kinds of Christians who are. Let me put it this way. I belong to a liturgically oriented communion, the Episcopal Church. I haven't joined because I'm done with church membership personally. And when I join a church, what always happens, I either go in all whole hog and I become a horrible person to live with, or I always look for problems then that I can fight against. And that's my personality. So I've been going to an Episcopal church for 12 years. and be very active. It's a beautiful community. The thing about liturgy, okay, all churches have liturgies, but they're different kinds of liturgies, right? The liturgy of the Episcopal Church and Roman Catholic Church and Orthodoxy, there is a lot of repetition of things. And the thing is, when you do that, it sort of eventually seeps into you, so that when you have trouble believing, there's language that comes back. Now, I think most Christians have that with hymns. I remember hymns, right? I remember passages of the Bible, but there are other things to remember too. And the liturgy is there as you're saying things, reciting the Nicene Creed or something in the morning when you don't believe half of it. You're around people who are going to help you believe and believe with you and if need be, for you, if you just can't do it, but you want to be there anyway, right? And things like, acts of kindness, donating to Ukraine, what I heard this morning, or just being good, kind people to each other. That is a way of experiencing God too that transcends our intellect, or maybe infuses our intellect a little bit. So I think that's maybe one reason, because those other things, I've been a parts of churches where all that other stuff is, yeah, it's nice if you can get to it, but the real thing is making sure you're right about everything, right? And to me, I think that's sort of an endemic in Western Christianity. Again, that's a very sweeping kind of statement, but I'll stand by it. I think that's a recurring problem of an over-intellectualizing of the faith and not having room for other things that are, I think, biblically speaking, a lot more important and a lot more central. Which isn't to, I'm sorry, I'm rambling here, but it doesn't mean the intellect is bad, right? Right? It just means putting it in its place. That's all. Yeah.
So how do you go about now in this new place that you're at, where you kind of described it to us this morning, and where you're maybe setting aside a few of those questions that you're just maybe not gonna answer, or do you leave one or two just hanging out there that you're praying over or you're studying on, or how do you find balance? Because I also feel like if you just go, well, certain things can't be known and I can't understand this, then maybe I'm missing out on something that God has for me. Mm-hmm. I'm just not in it long enough. I don't know if that's a good...
Yeah. I keep thinking about things I don't understand, because I'm not really satisfied. Just, oh, well. But at the end of the day, I think we're all going to say some sort of an, oh, well, because we don't really grasp it. And I think part of, my journey, and this is mine and maybe other people's too, but it's been decentering my mind.
Okay.
Decentering my analytical mind, and because that gets in the way a lot, And again, I hear people say that who don't like academic stuff, and it sort of irritates me. Like, you don't even know what you're saying. But but I live in it, and ironically, it's because of that academic world that I've lived in that I've seen how it can only carry you so far, right? So something else has to take its place. And lo and behold, there's all sorts of stuff the church has been talking about for 2,000 years that are a part of that. And I try to just live into that a little bit, as I think through this stuff. And there are plenty of things I know that I'll never know.
Yeah.
But it's okay, because I get to try to think about them and figure them out as best as I can. And when I've done that, I have to say to myself, okay, that's not a bad placeholder for now, right?
Yeah, sure.
And I'm sort of counting on God understanding that I'm just doing the best that I can with my very limited context as one, a white male living in Philadelphia. I don't think the secrets of the universe are open to me, So I want to be who I am and just respect who I am, but also respect my limitations and just keep walking forward, but without a sense of pressure,
Yeah.
Because if you believe that the Spirit of God is in and around you, and I believe the Spirit of God is in everybody and everything. I think there isn't a corner of creation that's sort of separate from the presence of God. It's all good. It's all good. It's going to be fine. Doesn't mean I can think what I want to. I can say all sorts of stupid things. I need to be corrected. I need to be convicted about things. But the journey is fine. It's what we're on. It's what I'm on, and I'm perfectly happy with that.
Hey, Jeff, you had something?
Well, I was just thinking.
Oh no, the
it does-
therapist. How am I doing, Jeff?
Well, it feels a little.
It feels, Pete, like what you're saying. Tell us about your dad,
Yeah,
Pete. How's that?
We'll get to that. Yeah. It does sort of feel like a luxury in a way for those of us that are here. It's kind of nice. Matter of fact, I appreciate what you've done to help us understand how the Bible can be read and looked at from not so much a proof texting way or a way to establish a doctrine or a teaching. I think we get a chance to do that, but for the parents that are here, we still have to tell our children, you're going to church this morning.
Right.
And the child goes, why? Because I said so. And
That's a great one.
And that's where it goes. And so how do we...
Been there.
Yeah. How do we as parents, and I'm past it, so like I said, I get this luxury of, but how do we as parents take this aspect of doubt and the child's crying out for some kind of clarity? How do we work that through in our children?
I mean, I ponder that question because I'm not sure. I don't think I did it well myself. And my daughter, Liz, who has 2 children, they're 4 and 2, she's determined to think of a different way of doing it rather than, she heard her whole life in churches just praying God will take care of you, nothing bad will happen.
Yeah.
Well, she figured out by the time she was 6, that doesn't happen. People are dying all over the place, God loves you. And then she reads stories about the Egyptian army drowning in the Red Sea. And she asked me once, she said, aren't they God's children too? I'm like, don't talk to me. I don't have time for that. But it's true. And I think this is, again, I'm not part of your world. Right. I mean, and I know each iteration of Christianity, each denomination, each church has its own things to work through. Right. So I can't speak into that, the way I wish maybe that I could. I don't know. But I think what I'm seeing happening from teaching college students and from trying to pay attention to mothers who ask me that question have been asking me for years. I think the future of Christianity in the West is going to be about creating cultures and homes where they're going to create a culture of being able to ask questions and it's okay. Right?
Yeah.
It's like when I was talking to my son, when he was 6, we had just moved and we got out of our read the Bible every morning routine. And so let's get back into it for God. So we're reading that was cynical, but I have a reason for that. There's nothing wrong with that. However, with my son, Eric, we decided, I don't know what made me read Genesis chapter 3, the serpent and all that stuff. And so I'm reading to him the story, and as I'm reading, he goes, so I just kept reading, and he goes, so I ignored him as a good father. I kept going. I finally said, Eric, what's wrong? He goes, Dad, snakes can't talk. Now, the thing is, I'm going to say I think he's right. Snakes, we don't, and if you say you heard a snake talking, you're probably going to report somebody for thinking that. But and I know creation is an issue, in the Adventist church, and I respect that. I'm not speaking to that specifically. I'm speaking more into creating a culture where your kid can ask that question, and you're not going to tell them to shut up. And I'm thankfully, it's one of these times I think the Spirit just sort of did that to me, and I didn't sort of say I wanted to say, Eric, shh, he may hear you. Don't say that, right? But instead I said, Eric, if you feel that way, tell God that, right? And I think that was a good thing to say to him, right? So creating a culture where it's okay to sort of wander off the beach blanket now and then or to color outside the lines But again, where church attendance is really strongly expected for children, you have to go. And they'll go up to, when my daughter was 14, come on, Sophie, time to go to church. I'm not going. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. Why not? I don't believe that stuff anymore. Like, what do you do in that situation? You know, did you fail as a parent? I don't think so. I mean, but plenty of failures as a parent. Don't get me wrong. But I don't know. Or, you know, it's just I don't know what to do in a situation like that, other than this is where this young person is, and the last thing they need from me is to be judged and shamed for not doing things, forgive me, that might make me look bad in church.
Yeah.
And to that I say, you have to say to hell with that. That's not right. That's not going to that's not the grace of God. That's not the love of God. So what do we do? But again, the expectation. I get it. You know, I've been in other church communions where that's a big thing, and I can't presume to suggest what to do in a situation like that. You know, other than maybe lighten up on it a little bit. But I don't. But you know, again, the thing is that there's a tradition here, a strong academic tradition in this denomination. So that's valued. That's like a core value of the denomination. So that's a hard thing to think about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think just from, my perspective here at WholeLife Church, I think we have a culture already in place that is open to that, where we're open to discussions, we're open to hard topics. I don't think we shy away from them in any way. And I think that's part of when you were talking this morning, I was just thinking about if we're going to look at things the way you suggested, how community might be the most important part of what you're talking about, because it often feels like enough when God is in those silent periods and we're wondering and we're asking and we don't know. And sometimes it doesn't have to be, why, what's heaven like, or, what are the cosmos like? It's like, how come I can't pay my bills and I'm working, 2 jobs and I can't get a break and my kids don't want to go to church? And I just need an answer to one of these. Like, I don't need it all. I just want one. And I feel like really the community that you just described is what we've been kind of working towards. And I feel like that's where Ken has even been, almost hyper focused on us as a family. And I've really appreciated that, because for the same reasons you just mentioned, that was how I was raised, where it was like, this is an expectation, and there would be plenty of church members, maybe meaning well, I didn't feel like it, but there was 101 reasons you were going to hell, but there were very few reasons that there was anything positive or good, or and heaven was just this, and salvation was just this thing at the end. There was never any of it in the now. And I think about it, and I don't have the answer, but what that looks like for us as a church community moving forward. I think we have a lot of things we do pretty good, but where we could really sharpen, Ken. I wanted to throw that one.
You're just sitting there, Ken.
Yeah,
do something.
I was looking forward to Peter's answer to that. I was really looking forward to that. I think for us as a family, there's got to be a recognition that it's okay for us to think outside the lines, and not only is it okay, but it's encouraged. I am a rather proud Seventh-day Adventist, and what I'm proud of the most is the way that this Seventh-day Adventist church started. It started with a group of people who questioned everything in the Bible. Nothing was off the table. Everything was on the table for questioning. We had people in our denomination who were anti-Trinitarian. We had those that were Trinitarian. We had people who believed one thing about Daniel and Revelation, and people who believed a completely different thing about Daniel and Revelation. There were people who believed all kinds of different things, and that was one of the beautiful things, is that we started off as a creedless church. The idea was, you believe what God inspires you to believe. Of course, we have some commonality here. There's going to be some common organizational structure. But question, why do we go to church on Sunday? Why are we doing that? Why does the Bible say to not eat certain foods? And unfortunately, we've begun worshiping certain parts of our doctrine that weren't meant to be worshiped, but were there to be useful as a life, not as prescriptive for everybody. And so, I really appreciate so much what Pete's been talking about, because there is a growing fear in certain circles of Christianity and the Seventh-day Adventist Church of education and of going and actually learning more. I've actually heard this in some of the circles that I walk in is, well, you don't want to really go too far because you'll learn too much and it'll make you question your faith.
Oh, wow.
And I'm sure I'm not the only person who's heard that. And so I guess, Pete, one of the things I'd ask you is, I think that, you kind of talked about how you went on, got further education. It did kind of shake a little bit of your faith because you learned more. But do you think it was worth it?
Yeah.
What? Yeah.
Good answer.
But there was a lot of pain in it, wasn't there?
There were some... there was pain in terms of my relationship to my community, but not pain inside of me.
Right.
I felt very right about it, but I did feel a little bit scared sometimes. I 2 months into my doctoral program, something had been nagging me for a while, and I rode my bike home like I did every day, and I just parked it in the back, and I walked into the kitchen. And I just sort of stared at the refrigerator for about 5 minutes because some things were just falling apart for me. And the thing is that the things that were falling apart made complete sense. I understood how the pieces were coming together. And, you pick up on some of these things, like the bolt of the tumblers were just coming together. And I just remember having this conversation with my refrigerator one day. I didn't get an answer. I was hoping to, but I'm not sure I really believe this part of the Old Testament or that. But not believe like it was. The reality is different than what I've been taught. It's not a matter of believing it or not believing it, right? It's a matter of was Abraham necessarily a person, or was he a representative of something that Israel used to tell a story? There are different opinions on that. I'm just saying the fact that it's a question, right? How much evidence is there for the Exodus story from an archaeological point of view? It's not a matter of whether it happened or not. It's like, how do you understand that story? That's an open question. People talk about that all the time. And I could see these are extremely valid academic questions to be asking. They're not silly questions about people who hate Jesus, right? So I had to I had to get into that a little bit and to respect, I guess, where that journey was going at that point, and back to kids, you're not going to dump that on a 5-year-old, but I think, my granddaughter's 4, and my daughter, I said, she's really determined not to teach her things about God that she's going to literally need therapy for in her 20s. But she says, how do you do that? And the thing is that I think there are people in this generation who are trying to figure that out. Because the Christian faith has content.
Yeah.
How much content? I mean, not to go on, but a friend of mine once said this. It made so much sense to me. He says, think of like 3 concentric circles. The center is dogma. Dogma is that without which you don't really have Christianity. The circle around it is doctrine. That's what makes individual Christian communities different, like Saturday Sabbath, for example, right? On the outside is opinion. Should you have a drum set in church or not, right? And the definition of a fundamentalist is they put everything in the dogma category. Mm-hmm. And the definition of a liberal, I hate these words, but the definition of liberal is everything's in the opinion category, right? So the question is, how do you maintain, let's say, doctrinal things that are important to a community and maintaining dogma, but also knowing what the opinion is, and maybe having little gates between the circles where you can sort of have the freedom to discuss some of these things. Because things that some people think is a dogma, like infant baptism, like without that, everything falls apart, right? Is that a dogma? Can we talk about that? Should this be shifted into that category instead of this category? And that's why I can't presume to speak for this communion, because, how to do this with kids, it's not a matter of do you keep the Adventist church or do you throw it into the garbage can? It's a matter of how do you adapt and how do you, frankly, evolve as a congregation, and what does it mean to adapt and to evolve? And that's context specific. You don't have to become Lutherans or something like that, or anything else. It's who you are, and how much are you willing to consciously adapt to changes. And that sounds like a horrible thing to think about, but I won't get on my soapbox, but the entire biblical story is about adaptations over time. It's a beautiful thing to behold. Later authors arguing with Job, right, from yesterday, Job is arguing with Deuteronomy on some level, because Deuteronomy has the same position that his friends had. You must have done something wrong because God's cursing you, right? God wouldn't curse you if you're righteous. See, it goes, the New Testament exists, the Christian faith exists because of adaptations that were made to the story of Israel. Land doesn't matter anymore. What? Are you crazy? Temple, I'm the temple. Oh yeah, whatever, Jesus. That's great. That's fantastic. All these things that were central to Judaism. So Judaism wasn't thrown out. It was adapted, right? And the thing is that every denomination has to do that. Every Christian has to do that, is to adapt to the world around us somehow. And I think if we really believe in the incarnation, and a God who incarnates, whatever that means, and frankly, I don't know what it means, because that's one of the core mysteries of the Christian faith. Well, Jesus is God and man. Yeah, what does that mean? You believe it, but you don't understand it. That's the mystery, right? So, but if we have an incarnating God, we should be able to handle a God who can handle our adaptations as we live out this human drama that we're a part of. The problem is that not everybody thinks that's right. So how do you have a conversation with adapters and non-adapters, right? And welcome to most of Christianity through its history, I think, at that point, right? So that's nothing new,
I love this morning when you talked about the mystery of God. In my mind immediately, I don't know what you said after that, because my mind was immediately going to probably everything I've ever thought about God or think I know about God or who God might seem to be to me. But I was wondering in that process, because it's very easy to get lost. It's very easy to have nothing definitive. There's no black or white or hard evidence or however you want to put it. So where do we find what's trust inducing about that mystery? What makes it? Is it just because of the grandeur of it, what we can understand? It must be so good that we have to trust it. And that was a question that I've been struggling with since that point this morning. I don't know why that was the piece that grabbed me, but the mystery grabbed me. And then, we're talking about trust, and that's something we all would love to be better at. What part of that do you think, or how can we put those two together?
Yeah. Let me answer it this way. Coming back to what you just said. A question I get a lot from pastors is fairly conservative pastors who say, Pete, I read your stuff and I've listened to the podcast and I'm reading some other people and I get it. The Bible is not what I thought it was, and the Bible's not my foundation, and I get it, but I need a foundation. And my answer is always, you don't get to have one. Not yet. You haven't earned the right. You can't fill that vacuum like that. Like, okay, I got the mystery thing, but I still want something to hold on to. Maybe that's that Mother Teresa story, that you have to learn to not want that. And then part of, I think, the task of doing theology, and we're all doing theology, folks. Every one of us is doing theology on some level, right? The task of theology, and I think the task of the Christian life, is to walk along that so that those questions might be more answerable in a year or in 5 years, and along the way you're trying to trust God that I used to have this set of answers. They don't work. You got to give me another set of answers real quick because I can't. No, that's the whole problem, is that you have to have these set of answers. Some answers are great. It's the needing to have them. It's almost a neurotic anxiety of being without an anchor as we define anchor. what if God is the anchor,
Yeah.
not our understanding of God, right? And that's why, I think when I wrote about this in The Sin of Certainty, but when you feel abandoned by God, you might actually being abandoned by the God that you created. And who doesn't do that?
Ouch.
And maybe that's God's move. Say, we need to stop. And thank God, right, for those moments and those times. And I don't say that lightly because, especially if there's nothing worse than a parent going through some sort of a crisis and they've got kids. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know what to do anymore. I don't know what to tell them, right? And that is very, very hard. But I got my own problems. I can't solve your problems too. You're going to have to, work through that. And I'm being a little facetious here, but I think that is part of the journey of faith. And here's the thing that I found to be, and this has helped me a lot. Somebody said this to me years ago. Working it out, trying to work it out, is theology. Think about that. Theology isn't, okay, now I have it all worked out. Here's how the pieces fit together. I will now go on with living. No, it's actually the act of living and being confused and seeking some sort of clarity, right? Clarity is not a bad thing. I'm not poo-pooing that. Just sometimes you don't have it, right? Yeah. You don't always have certainty, but you can have conviction. And you can hold that warmly with humility and with love for others, and not as a sword to lop somebody else's head off that you disagree with. I think it's actually without the struggles, I don't think we learn how to love properly. Because I've been much more patient with people in my life because of my own journey of faith. And I think that's a good thing for me to have learned. So, yeah, what do you replace it with? It's something that you don't even imagine at this point. That's what it's going to be replaced with. But in the meantime, you might not have the answers that maybe other people are expecting you to give, which is hard.
Yeah.
If you're part of a communion, or if you're getting paid to talk about this stuff, right? We're teaching in schools and things like that. It doesn't work very well.
I thought he was going to have a lot more answers than he did.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we've kind of, taken the floor here. And so anyone have any questions? Anyone have any comments? Please step up and let us hear them.
Far too many eager people to get up here. That just bothers me.
I actually wanted to put you on the spot a little bit about something that's already been talked about.
Okay.
Because I have my 14 and 15-year-old right there.
Okay.
And they are looking at me like they're going to kill me afterwards.
Okay. And they probably will.
Yeah. And they might try. But the thing is, actually, and I would have loved for my 15-year-old to actually ask the question, but I don't think she's going to have the fortitude to come up. So.
Yeah, but you do, apparently. And you're not embarrassing them at all, which is great. Okay.
So somebody has to. But this is the thing. We've been talking, by the way, for the last couple of years, whenever we have a trip that's more than an hour long, we've been listening to you guys on the podcast.
Thank you. Yeah.
And she's been reading the Bible, with this plan for a year and a half, like there are many of them out there. And she's in the book of Judges. And of course, we've had so many questions. Exactly, yes. And the most recent one is Samson. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, we've always grown up and we've taught them that the Bible is a little more special than maybe, I don't know, some other book. And it's got something more for us than some other book. And it's and we believe, I guess, by faith that God has been involved in it. Mm-hmm. So we give it more value, if you will. But now with all these Old Testament stories, I'll be honest, I wish you would have started with just the New Testament, but no, she went for the good stuff. And now, I guess I'm coming back to, and a little more specifically, if it's at all, of course, don't tell me that you're not going to give me clarity, but how do we address as parents with your view of how to read and interpret the Bible, if you will, when our kiddos are actually wanting to read.
Right.
And, and they say, did God really inspire this? This says here that, God is the one that did all this through Samson and, and he killed all these. You get that. So. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, to me, that's actually probably the most common question I get from college students, because of how they were raised. And the thing that I learned, I'm not sure if the person's here today, but somebody at the coffee, the Joe and Bible thing, Nathan, whatever you did, what's that called again? Yeah, that thing.
Jesus in a cup of
Anyway,
Joe.
somebody mentioned Judaism and Jewish approaches to Scripture, which is extremely valuable. Two of my professors, my two closest professors, were both Jewish. Boy, was that interesting, getting run through the ringer and all my Protestant assumptions. But the thing about Judaism is that you're allowed to debate the text. You're allowed to interrogate it. You're allowed to interrogate God. Go figure that one out, right? And one of my professors, John Levinson is his name, he said once, the difference between Jews and Christians in terms of the Bible, in terms of its interpretation, is for Jews, the Bible is a problem you sort of get to solve. For Christians, it's a message that has to be proclaimed. So you can't look at things like, the command to kill all the Canaanites and take their land. Well, what a beautiful sovereign God we have. You're not allowed to interrogate that. The fact is that the Old Testament itself later interrogates that. That's the beautiful thing about this literature. You have to keep reading, right? And it's perfectly, again, it's easy for me to say because I don't have a 14, 15-year-old at home, and I don't know if I would have said this back then, but I wish I would have. It's okay to say, it's okay to say, I don't get this at all. This is, kill everybody and take their land, because if you don't, you might worship their gods, and I only want you to worship me. And as one of my students said once, it seems like God's really into himself. But the thing is, on the other hand, this is part of, I think, the bigger question here, and this is the hard one because it has so many moving parts. It just does, and it's unavoidable. The bigger issue here is the nature of the Bible. And not to caricature too much, but maybe you've heard these sort of options. I don't think the Bible is God's love letter to us. I think the Bible is, my opinion, this is my opinion on the Bible. The Bible is a record of people of faith from ancient times who are trying to understand God as best as they can in their context where, guess what? All the gods were violent. But as you keep reading the Bible, God gets less violent. Like, God loves the Syrians in the book of Jonah. He wants them to be saved. Jonah doesn't, but God does, right? It's just the Bible is not, it's all God's word, so it's all like almost scientific data for putting the pieces together, but it's not. It's a narrative. It's a story. And it has high points and low points, and it has internal debates. There are internal debates in the New Testament. The Gospels differ. Paul and James didn't get along. Read Galatians chapter 2. Read James and compare it to Galatians, just the letters, and it's like these guys are on opposite pages when it comes to works and faith. James is very Jewish. Paul is less so. That, to me, that's a beautiful thing. So when you enter the act of reading the Bible, it's like I get to just be honest and to voice something that might be bothering me. And as Christians, I think we can say pretty quickly, I don't think Jesus would want us to go and take other people's land away from them. And I think the Jews, by the way, Jews have come to the same conclusion, right? After the Bible. There's a whole Jewish tradition called Judaism, and they're dealing with all this stuff. It's not just Christians, right? But to me, that's a beautiful thing, and that encourages an adult approach to the Bible, a faithful reading, but also one that is not afraid to question the Bible, because I think the Bible questions itself, first of all, and I don't think it's too diverse a book. It's too all over the place to act as a roadmap for everything every question you want to ask. Because there are places, again, should I say this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't even know what I'm going to say. Okay. There are contradictions in the
More
Bible.
on the fence, just,
okay.
Go ahead.
Well, nobody cares what you think.
Yeah,
it's just the pastor. There are contradictions in the Bible, and I don't think God contradicts himself, but I think authors living hundreds of years apart in different contexts will have a different take on God.
Yeah.
That is a beautiful, beautiful thing in our Bible. And you know what? all these Jews after the exile who put the Bible together, they weren't stupid. They knew that. They knew Job was not really the kind of orthodox book you're going to put in a Bible. You're going to stick with Deuteronomy or Proverbs or things like that. But they valued that multiplicity of voices, right? And Joshua is one of those voices in the book, right? So you read it, frankly, with curiosity. Say, what do I take from this? And sometimes it's okay to say, at this point in my life, I take absolutely nothing from this. I've been at this for a long time. I get nothing out of 1st and 2nd Kings. I really don't. It's a list of all the kings. Here's all that they did wrong. And the moral of the story is, well, that went horribly, the monarchy. Let's never do that again. And if we do, let's make sure we don't land into exile ever again. It's just, it doesn't really apply to me that much. I can work with it and try to make it apply to myself, but it just doesn't speak to me as much as a book like Jonah, which says, tear down your nationalistic, tribalistic boundaries, and maybe God cares for people outside of Israel, right?
Wow.
But there are other days when, other years where people like attracted to other books. That's fine. It's this library of books. It's fantastic. It's beautiful, right? And just, it's okay, Go ahead, just keep reading. But you want to get to some Psalms sooner or later. Maybe read Mark's Gospel. It's the shortest.
First of all, I'm so happy that this is happening. I really love our church. Been a part of it for a long time. And I do think we have institutionalized in our congregation this acceptance of question in the adult realm. I think there is something that I think is missing, and I'm curious if you've seen it in a successful application. I think you mentioned Judaism in a way that gives hope, that there's a way to approach Bible study that encourages some critical thought and analysis and some mystery and some trust. I'm curious, back to the thing about kids, I'm not satisfied with the idea that parents are going to figure it out. I think you're right, but I'm not happy that that's an answer we're going to just accept and live with. Because if there is a crisis that we know a portion of a congregation is going to enter, we as a church should come up with a supportive, institutionalized template for help and framework. Right. And I think when you talk about caricaturizing Scripture, I think we literally do that in our children's programming when the story of Esther and Samson literally become cartoons that are intentionally made concrete because we think that kids are yearning for that. And I think no one's yearning for concrete more than a new parent, including their children. I don't think children are desperate for concrete as much as their parents are. And so I think, how do we as an organization, as an institution, create content for little ones? How do we prioritize that so that we're not having continual therapists come to, not that, I don't want to minimize your efforts in helping adults solve some baggage, but our church has been solving children's baggage for a long time in the adult room. So how do we institutionalize a way of approaching Bible education, or more importantly, Christian education in the early years, where we're not encouraging certainty, but we're encouraging uncertainty and mystery? And have you seen any organizations that are institutionalizing that value?
I think you're more likely to find that outside of what I would call biblicistic churches. You know what I mean by that? Biblicistic churches. It's in America, at least, many churches were founded. I mean, there's so-and-so Bible church. At least we have up in the Northeast, right? So because we stand on the Bible and the Bible alone, so it's biblicistic, meaning this is essentially our rule book. I mean, Adventists seem to have that kind of a history, right? So that's a biblicistic church, and that's Baptists, that's certain kinds of Presbyterians, it's certain kinds of Methodists, whatever. At least in their history, Nazarenes. I was part of the Nazarene church for a few years back. So I think biblicistic churches will have a more difficult time with that. I think churches that predate evangelicalism, Episcopal, Catholic in a lot of respects, Orthodox churches, Lutheran, older kinds of Methodists and their other denominations, they don't have as much of a problem with this because it's not part of the denominational DNA to be, quote, biblical. Ever hear of the Wesleyan quadrilateral? Okay, everybody just a few people. Yeah, I love that. It's, our knowledge, our theological knowledge is based on an interplay between Scripture, our reason, our tradition, and our experience. Boy, that makes a lot of sense, The Episcopalians have a three-legged stool. It's Scripture, experience, and tradition. Scripture, reason, and tradition. I think they leave experience out, but all those three things are experiences anyway. So, those are non-biblicistic ways of thinking theologically, and that's passed on. I know in the Episcopal Church, I wandered in there once years ago when my mother was my mother. That was a Freudian slip. My wife. Hi, Mother. Can we? This is being edited, right? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think Sue will listen to this, anyway, but where she was helping out, and I've been in plenty of Sunday school classes in my life with kids, just picking them up and things. I never taught kids Sunday school. Never would I teach children Sunday school. Hardest thing I ever did was write a curriculum for little kids. You haven't lived until you've explained a Pharisee to a 6-year-old. But I mean explained a Pharisee, not the caricature they hated Jesus, but just what is a Pharisee and why should we care? Anyway, so we're in there, and I'm expecting like normal Sunday school stuff. Here you cut this thing out, you color that, whatever. And what I see is two things. I see on the wall, it probably is long, almost as long as this wall here, butcher paper. Those big butcher paper things. And on it is a timeline of history. And guess what the first thing is on that timeline? It's not Adam and Eve. It's the Big Bang. And they got like cosmological stuff. And, okay, this Episcopal Church, the first historical thing is Abraham. Because they're taught that these stories at the beginning, they're metaphorical. You can say mythical if you want to, but that doesn't help a lot of people. They're highly symbolic, metaphorical stories, right? But then it goes, then it takes sort of the timeline and traces it to now. And I thought that was, okay, that's interesting. You're not setting them up for needing that therapy later on when they go to high school and they learn some biology or something. But the second thing is that what they were learning was the liturgy of the church. They're being prepared to enter a worshiping community, not prepared to being Bible experts or apologists. As opposed to, again, am I stepping on toes? I really don't want to, but it's illustrative. Ken Ham, you guys know who Ken Ham is? He doesn't like me at all. That's okay. But I've talked with some of the young kids that are part of that world, and we call them Hamites, but these are beautiful young kids who have all the answers memorized. That's what it means to be a Christian. You have all the answers. You have certainty. And I remember I was at a conference once, long story, but I was talking to a bunch of them at a book table for like an hour. And 5 years later, one of them actually found me and emailed me and said, I've left that whole movement. I just want to thank you for giving me the freedom to think outside of that, right? But that's very unusual, And I think the way to do what you're asking here, again, that's very context specific, in my opinion. And you're not doing it, though, alone. You're doing it as part of a denomination, which I think I'm sensing you're saying is part of the problem. And I don't say that in a demeaning way. It's just, it's an old denomination, right? So what do you do? I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. I mean, I don't know what to do. You can keep doing quietly within, but even if you do something, there are going to be people within here who aren't going to like it. Part of this communion, right? So what do you do? I mean, it's easier to have it handed down from a denominational hierarchy to say, this is what it means to teach children, but you're on the ground doing it and you're sensing a different kind of need. So what do you do? To me, that's one way of encapsulating the whole problem with the organized church. You have those kinds of problems,
But I think. Oh, go ahead, Ken.
I was going to say, what a good question that is, because I think that, particularly within our tribes, DNA is the idea that we kind of program kids with all the right answers. And then we don't understand why when they go to college and they get different answers there, why it rocks their world. You just got to have faith is usually the standard comeback on that. And
or the parents didn't do their job.
Yeah, the parents didn't teach well enough. The Sabbath school teacher, the elementary school that was that we dumped tons of money into didn't prepare our child. And while we don't recognize that we tied the hands of the elementary school by not allowing them to teach curriculum that differed from our viewpoints and then discouraged thought in different directions. And one of the things that I'm committed to, and I want you to, that I really believe in, is I believe that we shouldn't tell kids that we know the answers. I think that it's okay to say, this is Dad's understanding of this. But if you come to a different opinion, Dad loves you and is glad that you're thinking for yourself. I remember my son Eric was probably about 5 or 6 years old. And he came up and he said, Dad, I don't know if I believe in God. And I kind of thought I knew what was going on. I thought he was probably just trying to see what kind of reaction I was going to give him. And I said, good for you, Eric. And that was not the reaction I think you'd expected. I said, good for you. I said, tell me why you don't believe in God. And we had a really great conversation about it. He said, well, there's this, 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 and this. And I said, okay, well, that's cool. Have you thought about any alternatives to those questions? Or are there any other things there that could go in the opposite direction of there being a God? Well, yeah, there's this, 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 and this. I said, good for you, Eric. You're on the right road. As long as you've thought it out, I'm behind you. As long as you've thought about it. I think a religion that cannot stand...
I'm saying, can our organization have that conversation? I get that.
Right. That's exactly the point.
You're having a conversation in your home.
But
Organizationally going to have that conversation where Sabbath school teachers, as your Sabbath school teacher,
yes,
I think this, but if you want to think differently, let's.
And that's what I'm telling you as senior pastor. Yes, Sabbath school teachers have my support in saying that.
You're soon to be former pastor.
Yeah. But
by the way, did you put all that stuff on your application?
Yeah, I did. I put, so you have your jobs up where you're at. But see, the funny thing about it is that you probably won't find anybody who likes the doctrines of the Adventist Church more than me. And the reason I'm not afraid to have that conversation is because I'm confident in what I believe. When you're not confident in what you believe, and I challenge anybody who wants to fire me to go ahead and say this, if you're not confident in what you believe, that's when you don't want to have debate about it. That's when we shut down debate. That's when, well, we can't think about this. But if you're confident in what you believe, I believe in God. I wasn't saying, good for you, Eric, don't believe in God. I was saying, I know there's a God, and I know that in my life, you're going to see him show up. Amen. I know in my life, you'll see him show up. And whether it's today, tomorrow, or a year or 10 years from now, whatever, you'll see him show up in my life. And I have confidence in a God that's big enough to come through. And organizationally, what I've discovered is I can't control anything other than what I'm in charge of. And sometimes I can't even control that if there's somebody who's in charge of me. And for those of you who are wanting to fire me here, just listening to the podcast out of context, because I know these things can get clipped, hear the whole context of what I'm saying. I believe in what the Adventist Church teaches. I'm just not scared to have my kids question it. And neither were the founders of our church, might I add. And so we don't have to be afraid of science. We don't have to be afraid of other denominations. We don't have to be afraid of people within our denomination that believe different things. There are people that I don't really enjoy my kids listening to within our denomination because they have a different slant on things. But if they want to listen to them, go for it. Listen to it, because if my faith isn't strong enough, if what I believe isn't strong enough to test of scrutiny, then what is it? And can we also admit that sometimes good people just have completely different answers, even though they're both incredibly intelligent? I mean, I have some fantastically intelligent atheist friends. They're not dumb. They're not dumb at all. They've thought through, they've come to a different conclusion than I have, and they're still my friend. And why do we Why do we get hung up on that? And I know that why we get hung up with our kids, because we want our kids to be in heaven with us. And that's what we want. But if God was willing to go ahead and let his kids have free will, why wouldn't we do the same?
I just want to say,
maybe tie a little bit. Okay, it maybe tie a little bit to a theology that still goes back to I have to believe the right things in order to be there, as opposed to it's God's gift, He's taking care of it, it's ours for free. We still have these little embedded emblems that if I believe the right stuff and I have it all straightened, then I'll get to heaven, which may not have anything. I mean, whether or not I believe what this church teaches is not salvific or not salvific. That salvific is part of the teachings of this church, but there's a bunch that's not. So I think you're absolutely right.
well, and I wanted to say that. Thank you, Andy, for that. Because I think you're spot on. Because I know there are a ton of people from my generation that were taught that this is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And if this isn't what you believe, then you may as well leave now. And there's the door, and don't come back. Because we don't have anything for you. Because if this is it was all salvonic, everything, and so to put that on someone who already at a certain age and at a young age is not equipped to deal with the rejection, and oftentimes even coming from parents, and then when your community has no support and thinks the exact same way. And there are a ton of groups. It doesn't have to be just teenagers. This goes to all kinds of people that feel marginalized by the church. And if there's no room for discussion, there's not even room it has to be comfortable. You have to know that it's a safe place, because I'm not going to come and ask you to just have one more person dump on me. Because I've had 50 dump on me already. I'm not going to do it, and then I'm going to leave anyway. So what the other side of it is, you can be rigid and just watch people walk away with no chance to even ask the question on the exit interview, like, what could we have done better?
Yeah,
there's no chance, and then you have to wait. And that's every time we do a podcast, I feel like I talk to people. My heart goes out to people that are on the outside beltway, that are just waiting for that invitation to come back, because of this very thing where it's my way or the highway.
Well, I just very briefly, I'm not going to go into a long harangue here, but so I think Ken, you and Randy, you're offering two alternative versions of the Adventist narrative. We've always been a certain way where we've been able to question things. There are other narratives, and you voiced it at the beginning. You're not agreeing with it, but you voiced at the beginning that, well, this is what we believe, and if you're not going to believe this, you're not an Adventist, right? The question is, which narrative, I hate to put it this way, is going to win? Who's going to have the right to shape the narrative? That is an extremely difficult question, because usually to people in power throughout history, the winners write the narratives. The people in power, people with the money, people with the clout, they write the narratives. How can you write a narrative for the denomination that's different and let it be heard? That's a hard thing to do.
I believe that's in community, and I believe that people, as we have grown at WholeLife Church, I believe that as we continue to grow, because it's a message of inclusion, it's a message of hope, it's a message of love and family, and that there's room for that discussion, eventually other people will take notice and gravitate towards that message. And I feel like that is the only way, is to legitimately live it out. And if you're not, it's just talk. There's no walk. So I think that'll happen. Sonny, tell us what you have.
My brain is going into all kinds of different directions. I'm not going to ask a question about coffee, so relax. Internal joke. So I was raised in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I was born into it. My grandfather was a pastor in the Dominican Republic. He's considered a pioneer. I was born into a somewhat conservative family, compulsory worship in the morning and in the evening, that type of stuff. As life goes on, hopefully none of my family members are listening to this. This congregation is probably the only thing that sort of keeps me within the church. I heard your experience about your feelings about denomination, but I've also heard about your love for the Bible, if I understood you correctly. And that's my challenge. I mean, I believe in the man in the portrait there. For those who are not here, there's a picture of Jesus here.
Clint Eastwood Jesus, by the way. Just
It's a great picture.
For those of you who are not able to see this visually, the picture behind us looks like Clint Eastwood with a beard.
Follow us at WholeLife ORL, and I will post a picture this week.
Okay, all right. And no 44 Magnum, I don't think.
So I believe in Jesus, and I believe that the Bible is the Word. But quite honestly, for me to pick up the book, it requires such an amount of energy. But then there's a side of me that feels that because I am not reading the book, I'm sort of wasting my time because somehow I'm not gathering out the points. I mean, how can you pretend to believe in someone you don't want to read about?
Yeah, right.
Much less expect that person to advocate for you.
Right.
You know, I mean, I believe in grace. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
So I guess the bottom line question is, especially for one who has born into the church or any denomination, because I'm sure I'm not alone, how do you get to really love the Bible, really have an interest, really wanted to believe it, to read it just for the sake of reading, not because somehow you're expecting to earn points or to get something out of it?
Good question.
Which is, thank you, Sonny, which is how I think that's been caught and taught in churches where you do get brownie points. Did you do your Bible reading today? How much did you do? Did you pray? Well, all that kind of stuff. And it becomes a mechanism, but that, we carry that with us. And I think it's fair to say, I don't want to overspeak, but hearing you, Sonny, you've been traumatized, in a sense, from the Bible and from expectations of Bible reading. Trauma is a big word, but I think it covers a whole lot of things where, like, it's sort of like, breaking up with an abusive spouse or something. I want to go back, but I don't dare, and I think sometimes, I think it's okay to walk away from the Bible because you have to press reset on that too. And I think God understands. I don't think God's waiting for you. When's Sonny going to start reading his Bible again? Because I'm sorely disappointed in him. And yeah, I know he has a history and all these things he's had to work through, but I don't care. I just want him to perform the right tasks to make me happy. Is that really what's happening? I don't believe that for 1 second. I think God understands our humanity and understands. There are times I don't want to read the Bible either, right? But I don't want to feel as if God is looking over me from the outside, ready to pounce. I think God understands me better than I do, and I'm not rebelling. I just can't, right? There are parts of the Bible I just don't want to read, and I don't, right? Somebody asked that question not long ago in another context, and I just said walking away from it for a while might be the best thing to do. I think sometimes people have to walk away from church because people are traumatized in church.
Absolutely.
They have to walk away. And coming back, that can happen, but it may take time. And, then somebody says, I think I'm ready to start reading the Bible again. Where should I start? And I said, there's something that impelled you to want to read the Bible again. Find that. Is it something about Jesus? Read a gospel. There's no program. I'm going to start with Genesis and totally crap out by the middle of Exodus, and I'll be done reading the Bible again for the rest of my life, right? Yeah. If you get through Genesis, right? So I just think, you really believe in what you believe in if you believe in grace.
Amen.
Right? If God is real, what if God doesn't hate you? What if God likes you? Yeah. Forget love. What if he just likes you and understands you and understands all of us? And you're clearly trying to do the right thing and do your best. But maybe to do it, to try to do it without a sense of an angry deity looking over you, but rather someone who actually loves you and delights in you and wants the best for you. And that might be, if you're honest with yourself and you say, I can't read this right now, that's okay. If you don't want to read it, you know what? Sit there for 5 minutes. If you can't pray, try not to think. Just try to be quiet. Anything that you do to connect with God is a good thing to do.
Absolutely.
Right? It doesn't have to be a programmatic Bible reading. That gets old too. Poor Melanie was waiting to make sure she gets up. No, that's fine. You're fine. I'm not. Oh gosh. No, I look like a.
Yes, Ken. There we go.
Way to be an angry deity.
I know. Sit down. You have displeased me with your forward moving to the mic.
You might regret letting me ask
I
you.
doubt it. I could just ignore you.
This
if
is
I
a
wanted.
very full. This is a very full circle experience for me with you,
Yeah.
because I did come to Ormond Beach when you were 5 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and I was surrounded by all Sunday keepers, and so I asked you that question because I really admire, especially that the book that you wrote, the Bible Tells Me So.
Mm-hmm.
It is as an ethnic Christian, it's not like how I've been attending this church. Like, if you were an ethnic member, you just kind of like the pastor tell you, and that's what it is. You don't get to question it. If you do question it, you might, not be feeling welcome back or and such.
Right.
And so I'm very glad that you wrote that book, because it is very freeing. And then being able to be a part of this community where, in Sabbath school, I've said some really weird questions or comments, and I've always been welcomed back, and I've never been asked to leave. So I really admire your work and that the scope of like your, the education that you have. And so again, I'm here with all my Sabbath keepers. So I guess my one question for you would be that, why is there so many denominations? And then how do you feel about the Sabbath, like the fourth commandment?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, those are two big questions. Yeah, that's fine.
We can't kick her out because she cooks way too well.
Yeah, I know. I've seen that already. I think denominationalism is an inevitable outgrowth of the fact that people and cultures and psychologies are different. I have left churches that I have hated, and other people have come there because for them it's a breath of fresh air, right? So I don't think there's one true denomination. I think denominations reflect our humanity. What's that hymn that says manifold witness? Great is our faithfulness. Is that, manifold witness? I think the human cultures and human churches and denominations are a manifold witness to God, and they're diverse, and I think God likes diversity, right? And by the way, not to belittle what you said, but I know ethnic minority Christian in this culture, but we're all ethnic Christians. Unless you're Middle Eastern, right? I mean, it's from the beginning. Unless you're Jewish, I think we're all sort of ethnic Christians, and we just, white men especially forget that sometimes. But I'm trying very hard not to. I mean, it's hard sometimes, but I'm trying very hard to remember that the world doesn't need me or any of us, quite frankly. So yeah, I think I think denominations are fine, and I've needed a liturgical context for 12, 13 years now. Whereas at other times I would go to a church that has a worship service like I experienced this morning, right? And whatever, it's just, we're just people doing our best. So the other thing about the Sabbath, I've really, I don't know, I've had different opinions in my life, and I can't really come down on one thing, but I do think having a day that's different, that you have different kinds of, like I try not to do schoolwork on Sunday. Sometimes I feel I have to, and my more Sabbatarian friends say, no, you don't. You don't have to do that. I'm like, you're probably right, but I also believe in grace. So I'm just going to finish this thing this morning. But I think... to be perfectly honest, I have this thought in my mind here. When I was in graduate school, and there were like 2 Christians in my department, I envied people who didn't have to go to church with kids and spend the whole day. I actually envied them. And I said, one day, I just want to get up on a Sunday morning. I'm sorry, we have the heretical Sabbath. The rest of the Christian church has the heretical Sabbath on Sunday. Relax, people. There was not the laughter I was expecting there. Okay? It doesn't matter to me. Whatever you want to do. But yesterday I looked at the program for the weekend. It said worship 11:30 Saturday. I was like, what are they talking about? Oh, wait, Adventist. Yeah, that's right. Saturday
That's
worship.
right.
I get it. Okay. But I think I've had to unplug from the concept of Sabbath and to try to replug myself back into it, because it can become an oppressive duty. Maybe it should be a little bit. Maybe it should take some discipline to sort of set your tasks away and to spend Sunday differently. But you cross that line between discipline and the whole guilt and shame thing about trying to keep it. And so, I do believe that God has our best interests in mind and understands who we are as people. So I don't think that, like the story, Danny, that you told this morning about the boy who broke the Sabbath and drowned, right? A childhood friend of yours, right? I don't think that happens to you if you, quote, break the Sabbath. I also think, theologically, I'm sort of more with like Calvinists here, which say the Lord's Day rather than the Sabbath, because the Sabbath is a stricter kind of thing that's largely an Old Testament idea. By the way, I'm not anti-Old Testament. It's just, that's why Jews have discussions about, okay, don't work on the Sabbath. What's work? How far can you walk? Can you do this? Can you do that? And I think traditionally Christians maybe have not felt the need to have that kind of a conversation, but the Lord's Day is transferred from Saturday to Sunday. I'm not arguing against Saturday Sabbath. I'm just explaining my position. That's why I come at it a little bit differently, perhaps, that it is a day set aside for worship and maybe just doing different things. But some people say, and for being with your family. Where's that in the Bible? Yeah, I mean, we make things up all the time anyway of how to keep these things, right? And part of the problem is that the Bible is really not very helpful in even talking about what you do on the Sabbath. Even if it says don't work, it fails to define work. So you have the whole history of Judaism, which is like, Talmudic Judaism. There are 36 things, I think it's 32 or 36 things that constitute work. And they thought about it, like you can't sew, you can't do this, you can't do that, right? But it's hard to know even how to keep the Sabbath. And sometimes in some places it's, you basically spend all day in church. 2 services, 3 services in between. You don't take your suit and tie off. You're not really suit and tie people, I'm gathering, okay? So you don't take the suit and tie off. It's just, there's a lot of stuff going around that. So for me, I think the idea of Sabbath rest or Lord's Day rest, I think is a beautiful idea. But I don't want it to become another thing that I have to do, or God's going to be mad at me for not doing it.
Yep.
I might get disadvantaged. I might suffer from not doing it, but I don't think God's zapping me. At least I hope not. I'm sort of banking on that idea. Because if I'm wrong, I am in deep trouble.
We'll talk to you more later.
Yes,
I did. All right. We have gone, we've been at this for just over an hour, and I want to make sure that, Kim, that we get your comment or your question, and then I just want to be respectful of Pete's time and make sure that we get him out of here. So come on up to the mic. Let's get one more in here.
Yeah, thank you for your grace. Just wondering if you could address the issue of why suffering, which is I know you're
Suffering.
If you could wrap it up in about 2 minutes, that'd be great.
That's like the question, the philosophy question. Define God. Give 3 examples. All right. In my quick opinion, I think we can't separate the idea of suffering from an evolutionary paradigm for how the world works, cosmically, geologically, and biologically. And I've read nothing, but I've read theologians who really think about stuff like this. And again, this is my opinion. I really want to. You asked, Kim, wherever you shouldn't have asked, but as my answer is that there's something about death and suffering that is sort of the cost of doing business in an evolutionary framework. I don't really understand that, but that seems to be the cost of it. And at least the gospel has something to say about suffering, that God enters into our suffering on the cross, and a shameful suffering that is completely and utterly counterintuitive. This is not how you start a religion in the first century. Oh, by the way, come join our religion. Our founder was nailed to a Roman cross, which means he lost. Yeah, and our God wants that. That's a shameful thing. You just don't do that, right? So I think the gospel can speak into that question a little bit. The problem is that we are sentient beings with consciences, and we think backwards and forwards in time, and we think of what could happen and what we've lost. And the suffering for us is so emotional in ways that it might not be for my cat, right? Or for the stink bugs that are in my house right now. It's different. So I think we have that problem that might not have been a problem several 100,000 years ago. And that's also the cost of a developed consciousness, which is also, people say, part of an evolutionary framework. We're becoming more in tune to the deity as time goes on. So that is, I'm going to guess that might not be the answer that anybody was really hoping for here, but that's how I think through it. I can't think through these things apart from how I think most people understand the larger world around us, right? I can't answer that question from a point of view of thinking about, okay, God is up there looking down and is directing good things or bad things to happen to certain people. You get cancer, you don't. I have a problem with that because I'm not sure what up even means. And with the cosmos that is almost literally infinite, that God is somehow above and around or whatever, I can't talk about a God up there sitting on the throne. They could in the Bible. But that's okay, because God in his wisdom, for whatever reason, these are the people who wrote down a lot of the stuff, and they had their metaphors, they had their worldviews. Ours is different. The question is, how are we going to deal with that? And a question like that, I can't even begin to address it in my mind without, frankly, thinking of everything else. Right. And that's the hard part. You have to think of everything to answer anything if you're going to talk about God's involvement in it. Amen. And I can't, mystery, thank you. I don't have to figure, I can try, I can riff on it, but I simply can't understand it. But I will say the problem of suffering is the perennial problem in the history of religions. And it was easier when you had many gods, because you could blame it on one because the other one's not helping you out. As soon as you're a monotheist, that's when the question comes up. Yeah. And I'll leave with this. A theologian friend of mine, his name is Tom Oord, O-O-R-D. Anybody know who he is? Need to know who Tom, he's a great guy. He explains things really on the bottom level. But he is among many theologians who say things like, because God is love, God does not coerce, because love does not coerce, right? You have spouses. Do you love your spouse? Do you ever try to coerce them into something? You're not loving them at that point, right? Love doesn't coerce. Love respects. Love lets things pan out. And if evolution is God's way of creating, this is how it works. And this is the cost of doing business for a universe that has given us indescribable beauty and diversity on our planet and in the universe around us. This is the cost of having the kind of universe that we have, but there's something about the gospel that can speak into that, right?
Excellent. All right. So I want to, first off, thank you so much for taking this extra time way above and beyond.
Thank you. Oh, no, sit down.
The flowers. So I want to say, first off, thank you. It's a treat for us to get a chance to pick your brain a little bit more and dialogue and have conversation. And for everyone that came out, thank you. This is a treat for us. Usually it's just Jeff and Ken and I stuck in a small Walton.
You don't set up here every week?
No.
So this is a real treat.
Yeah, it's a real treat. So thank you, everyone. And at home, in the show notes, if you swipe up in today's episodes, I will talk to Pete in just a minute, and we'll get some links for where you can find his books, where you can find his website, where he's on social media, all those things. So swipe up, and we'll have all that information in today's show notes. So thanks again, and thank you all for just showing up and joining us. We had a great time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.